Hello and welcome to the Curated Conversations webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Cultural Heritage Management and the Master of Arts in Museum Studies programs, and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on new careers, new museums. My name is Peter Huggins, and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Curated Conversations playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the event to our moderator, Dr. Stephanie Brown, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Museum Studies program.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I see we've got a pretty full house tonight, and that's always fun. Today we're going to do something a little bit different from what we've done in past curated conversations, and that is we're just going to have a conversation. Often we have had museum professionals present research they've done, present experiences they've had using PowerPoints, using slides. This time out, we are going to be joined by 4 museum professionals at different stages of their careers, talking about how they got into museums and why they got into museums and why they stay at museums. So let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Danielle Lancaster, who is a 2019 alum of our program, who joined the staff of the National Museum of African American History and Culture the year that she graduated. She is currently Program Analyst in the Office of the Director. And before entering the museum field, Danielle had an amazing career working in fashion history. Stephanie Carter is a 2011 alum of our program, who's currently the Museum Director and Curator in charge at the Washington National Guard Museum. That's Washington State, for those of you on the East Coast. Prior to joining that museum, Stephanie earned a PhD in Scottish Ethnology at the University of Edinburgh. Ask her about the Lewis chessmen. Erin Golightly is a 2015 graduate of the University of San Francisco Masters in Museum Studies program. She worked in the director's office at the National Museum of African American Culture and History and Culture, and then was special assistant to Secretary of the Smithsonian Lonnie Bunch. Erin is currently Senior Manager for Strategic Initiatives at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in Los Angeles. And finally, we're joined by my friend and colleague, Greg Stevens, author of A Life in Museums, who has worked in our field for many years and has taught in our program, in a number of other museum studies programs, and done professional development around the museum field for a long time. So we're so grateful to have all of you here, and I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. A treat to be with all of you. Thanks for joining us, and of course to my colleagues who are on this panel. And as Stephanie suggested, even calling it a panel isn't really accurate, because it's more like sitting around and having a conversation, maybe with whatever beverage of choice. But as we were thinking about and planning this particular conversation for this evening or this afternoon, wherever you happen to be, thinking about careers and our respective careers, something came to my mind, and it was born out of what I spend a bit of time with students and my coaching clients thinking about. Beyond your skills and the things that you plan to do or are doing in the museum field as an educator or a curator or a registrar or an exhibit developer or some other function in museums, getting at the root of why we're all here in this field. And it boils down to what I think is an interesting combination of the things that we're good at, the things that we might consider our strengths or our skills or competencies, whatever word you want to use, paired up with the things that we are most passionate about. That's why many of us came into the field, because we love art or history or science or trees or whales, anything that we find great passion and love for that brought us to the field. And then I've also been having a number of conversations with folks about our values. We are in a very value-rich field, museums, and we all have things that we value about ourselves, the folks with whom we work, and also the places where we work or the kinds of places we want to work in. So with that as a very, very broad and very loose framework, thinking about strengths, passions, and values, we decided to have a conversation. And so I'm not really going to pick on anybody, but I encourage my colleagues here, Danielle and Erin and Stephanie. What are your thoughts? Thinking about what you bring to the table in terms of strengths and passions and values in your work.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. It's really exciting to chat with colleagues. I feel like I'll learn so much. In terms of strengths, I think that something that I've identified is my ability to sort of see the whole, which is interesting because I've landed at this point in my career working in strategy. So that means you kind of have to identify what is the whole, what's the end, result, where are we headed, and then what are the steps that we take to get there. So identifying that strength, I think, allowed me to really focus on pursuing roles where I could, exercise that and can put that to work. In terms of passions, definitely the arts, but I think discovery is really a big passion of mine. And I think that I believe that that's what happens in museums, probably most profoundly. I hope most profoundly, that you go to a museum and you discover something new. That's what I want to experience in a museum, certainly. And then in terms of values, I mean, a list of values, certainly, but probably what shows up most aligning with my work is I value compassion and respect. And I think I know I strive to implement that in my relationships with my colleagues, but then also thinking about compassion and respect. I feel like that also comes up in collections and, wanting to respect objects so that they can stand the test of time and many people can experience them. So those are some things that resonate for me when you pose that question.
I love it. Thank you, Erin. When you're talking about your strength and seeing the whole and strategy, big picture, if you will, it's one of the leading skills that nearly everybody needs in a museum career now. It doesn't matter what your job is or what other kind of institution you're in, whether you're entry level or mid-career or beyond. That ability to see that whole thing, even if you're not in charge of the whole thing, but to see how all the pieces fit together is really, really important. And I'm thrilled that you have discovered that as one of your superpowers, probably. And then I'm so fascinated by your comment about compassion and respect, which automatically makes you think of compassion for other people and your colleagues and being respectful. And then you turned it a little bit to collections, which I thought was like, oh, well, of course, right? Respect for the objects that are in our collections, what they are physically, taking care of them, the stories they tell, the stories we're telling to the people too. And So I think that's a really fascinating way of thinking about compassion and respect. And Stephanie Carter, I see you nodding as I'm saying that. What are you thinking?
I just took that as a note for myself because I thought that was really insightful. Because just like Greg was saying, you think respect and you generally think that about another person versus collections, and sort of my background is in collections and I've never thought of it that way before. So I totally just made a note about that for myself to think about later on. And in a little bit different to Erin, she's talking about she's really good with strategy and seeing the big picture. I do struggle with that a lot. I definitely I did a little forethought about this because little consideration before. And one of the things I think I'm good at that helps me in my job, profession, role is my attention to detail. And my focus has been in collections, and now I'm kind of in a director role. So I do face a little bit of struggle with coming out of the detail oriented and trying to look at the bigger picture. And it's something that I'm still learning. So I think that's definitely a great skill, Erin, that you have, and I have to learn how to be better at that and not get stuck in the weeds for all of the details that I feel like I'm better at. And that was one of my I'm good at things is details. Well, when you're in different roles, it doesn't necessarily pay to be so precise. And my coworker, bless him, who's on, could tell you that for sure too. He's very supportive, but he also understands I get stuck in the weeds sometimes. In terms of passion, personally, I have always been fascinated or interested about how others live, how other humans interact. So my first foray into education was in anthropology. And so definitely through time, that passion that started from a young age then evolved to being passionate about the things that we make as humans and utilize. That has just continued to evolve. I was definitely seeing it's been an evolution in my career. I haven't sort of midway in the scheme of things. So there's definitely an evolution that's been taking place. And another sort of I'm good at thing is passion. So I think those two go in tandem, because if you're good at being passionate about something, I mean that helps in what you're passionate about. For good or bad, perfectionism is something I'm real good at, or attempting to be. And again, that can be both good and bad. Some values, I think as Erin was saying, you can have a very large list of core values and what's important to you. Something in our field particularly I think is important is resilience, because you never know where this field is going to take you. And I think being able to be resilient and to bend and to move and to transform yourself is important, to be able to continue to make yourself relevant in the field. Definitely, I have a background in research, so I value things such as curiosity, inquisitiveness, the knowledge gaining kind of thing. So those are some things that I think that I can bring to my role or other roles in the future as well. Long story short, I hope that was what you were looking for there.
No, I mean, it's fabulous. And you and I have had many conversations about all of this. So I love that I love when you said passion is one of your strengths, because I had never thought about it quite like that. Passion is passion, but I love that you identified it as a strength, and who wouldn't need that in our field? I think it's really interesting that you're in a leadership role in your museum, very small museum. And I know that in earlier conversations you and I have had, you were talking about this evolution, right? Now you're in this leadership role in a very small institution which means that you have to balance out that big picture, the strategic perspective, and you also need to pay attention to details, right? Because you're probably wearing many hats, as folks who work in small museums often do, right? You might be the director and the curator and the collections manager, and also create exhibitions and maybe even sell postcards at the gift counter, if you will. So that balance is really interesting. And then you said resilience. So it just so happens I'm working on a museum career handbook, and the chapter I'm just finishing is all about skills and competencies, not just needed in the museum field, but more broadly in other fields. And so doing a lot of research from different places, Forbes and Harvard Business Review and LinkedIn, a whole bunch of places. And guess what? The number one skill is that everybody needs: resilience. Because it is such a crazy world that we're in right now, not just our field, not just our institutions, our field, but our society that we're in. You got to buck up, as a colleague of mine will say, right? That sense of resilience and flexibility and adaptability. And Stephanie, you moved across country, right? Talk about resilience to move with your kitty cats from Florida to Washington State. Just that right there takes a level of resilience and flexibility. So I applaud you for that. What do you think, Danielle?
I agree with Erin and Stephanie in terms of the attention to detail component. I think it's important because we are charged with telling these stories that are based in fact. And so when you think about that in relationship to how important our role is for the public facing component of museums, it's really important to be on top of details. And also another component is relationship building, whether you're in a small institution or a large one. I did my internship when I was in the program at the DAR Museum. So I worked with their costume curator, Alden O'Brien, and obviously a smaller institution than Smithsonian, but just really having those relationships, one, to be on top of what's happening and the tools that you need, but also even in a larger institution is equally as important, because when you have so many different departments trying to figure out who to go to, who to find out information from is going to be critical in any position really within the museum field.
You are talking my talk, Danielle. I have said for many, many, many years, doesn't matter what kind of job you do in the museum field, the real strength of our field is relationships. The relationships that we build within our institutions are people you might meet at a conference, or people you might be on a panel with, or say a curated conversation for Johns Hopkins, right? Stephanie Brown and I have known each other in various capacities for many, many years. So not only is it a really strong professional relationship, but you all know this too, right? Professional relationships often become colleague friends or friends, people that you share some aspect of your life with, maybe outside of work hours, for example. Stephanie Carter, you and I have engaged with each other in a number of ways over a few years. So that sense of relationship building, I think, is not only the foundation of our field, but I think it's actually one of the greatest things that we have going for us. Museum folks are definitely a unique breed, right? We come in all different shapes and sizes, but we are very unique. And the thing that unifies us is this commitment to the work we do, educational institutions, collections, whatever your particular angle might be, but we're all in it together.
Can I just add to that? It's no matter, even if you do work at a big institution, we still seem to feel like a small field at times. So you're bound to cross paths with someone that you have already met at an institution. So that relational building aspect, Danielle, is so critical.
Absolutely. And the other thing you said, Danielle, that I thought was really good, actually, you all said it in different ways, but storytelling, whatever your brand of storytelling might be, whether you're an educator or a curator, Danielle, I'm looking at your dressmaker's form behind you, and I'm thinking that's got a story to tell, right? There's some stories there. Or I'm looking at the framed diplomas and such behind Stephanie Carter's on her wall. I'm thinking there's a story to tell, right? If I didn't,
there are some chessmen back there. Ask me about the chessmen. They're back there.
Right. So we all have these amazing stories to tell individually and on behalf of our institutions, whatever our mission may be. And when I talk to people outside the museum field who often scratch their heads about, what is it you do? And sometimes I just cut to it and just say, I'm a storyteller. I come with a theater background, so theater design, before I even came to the world of museums. It's all about storytelling, right? Telling stories about the people we share the planet with and all of that. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit. This is definitely related to relationship building. A couple of other things that popped up on my list of skills and such, and that is collaboration. Collaboration rises up to the top of the list along with communication. And so I'm wondering if in your respective worlds you might share, what does that look like? What does collaboration and communication look like in your work? I don't know. Erin, what do you think?
I think it's just synonymous with museum work in general. I think about the core of our work is exhibitions, and no one department can put on an exhibition on their own, right? There's conservation, there's the interpretation, there's the educational aspect. But for me specifically, in terms of strategy and strategic planning, I really have to understand, where all the different departments want to take their work and their teams, and how that aligns with the overall strategy. So collaboration means constant communication, it means getting to a point where we can speak the same language institutionally. I work for a very new museum, so we're still developing that shared language. But to me, collaboration can't exist without communication.
Oh my God, I couldn't agree with you more. I recall having conversations with a couple of my students who were just interested in being collections managers or registrars, which is great. Absolutely. But fussed a little bit about why they had to do group projects, why we had to do a team assignment, right? The proverbial group work. And I would have to tell them, like, you may be able, as a collections manager, you may be able to sit in your cubicle and geek out with an object and a condition report for part of your time, but you're also probably going to have to communicate with people and collaborate in some way, right? Stephanie, I see you nodding your head. Yeah.
I was hired to do a curatorial role here. And so I thought I would be in my dark corner taking care of objects because that's all I ever want to do in life. And that's not necessarily what I get to do, because I work for a military organization. And when Erin was talking about speaking the same language, that is a language I do not speak. And so I've had to learn over the 2.5 years I've been here, 3 in July, how to collaborate with many different entities. So that National Guard is both a state entity, but I'm a federal employee, so I deal with federal people, state employees. I deal with, volunteers. I have all these different relationships that I need to be able to foster, to collaborate with, to create something, but also I have to communicate what the museum is needing from my perspective as the first professional ever hired here. So if they don't understand my language, I certainly don't understand Army language, and we're all trying to learn this together as we do what's best, for the museum. So I definitely wrote down when Erin said speak the same language. That is something we struggle with for sure. And I'm sure a lot of institutions struggle with that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I've never been in the military, so I don't know acronyms and things like that. So it's definitely a learning curve when you're coming into, like Erin's situation, a relatively new museum, and you're all trying to learn how to best communicate together. And it is proving to be very important to move the museum forward and to do what's best for the museum, is trying to get everyone on the same page. And for me, it's definitely been a learning curve to realize I have to not be an introvert and play with my objects in the dark. I have to get out and collaborate and make these relationships work, because it is what's best for the museum in the long run.
You can still be an introvert, but you also need to collaborate and communicate with folks. What do you think, Danielle?
It's interesting. I was just, I agree with Stephanie. My goal when coming to museums, I used to tell people I knew that I just wanted to be in the basement with the object. I don't want anybody to talk to me. I don't want, because I came from fields before, like the music industry, the fashion industry, where people are constantly talking to you. You're constantly around people. So I was like, oh, perfect. I can go work in a museum. It'll be quiet and I can just be in the basement with the objects. And that's totally not the case. I think I have more people that talk to me now working in a museum because of the communication piece, and because all the different departments have to work collaboratively in order for us to get to the end result, which is the public facing exhibition. So what the public sees is a host of a lot of different collaborative components that come together for this one potential exhibition. And so my initial dream of being in a quiet space, like somewhere far off, was just not realistic in terms of working in this field.
Yeah, a little bit of reality check. Stephanie Brown, you've known me for a long time. And when I was working at AAM for 10 years as the director of professional development, now arguably I'm an extrovert. I'm a theater person, I'm an extrovert. Put me in front of a group of people, wind me up, watch me go, happy as a clam. And so for many years at the annual conference, I was facilitating sessions or workshops or coordinating stuff, go, on, which completely satisfied me as an extrovert. But I'm telling you, at around 6 o'clock at night, after I've been on my feet for 12 hours, I know I bought tickets to that reception. I really want to see that museum. I really want to go hang out with my friends and have a couple of glasses of wine. But sometimes all I can do is just order room service and be quiet.
Yeah.
So having that recharge time is really important.
And I think there's I think we could conduct a survey at any large museum conference of the number of people who did not go to the reception event and instead went back to their room and ordered room service. I have memories of the margarita pizza in the hotel in Atlanta about 7 years ago. It was a terrible pizza, but I could not talk to one more person. And just to kind of flip that experience, Greg, I sit right on that line between an introvert and extrovert. And I often find myself when I am about to make the shift from being at the desk to being in front to having the conversation with lots of people, I think, oh, I hope that the person who knows how to do this shows up. I hope that that aspect of my personality will come to the fore. And I mean, I just try to like clear the decks and say, okay, I'm ready for you. And usually she does turn up, and I can be the extrovert in the room, right? But I think a lot of us in our field, we really toggle between that. Just want to sit at my desk and get my stuff done and think these thoughts and think about the big picture, and then I'll actually no, we got to go out and have these conversations and make those connections. And that's difficult, and it's also exciting, and it's also kind of makes you stretch, and it's good to stretch. We have Erin, were you about to? No, that was just glasses.
It was, but I actually want to throw something out there as we're talking about collaboration and maybe shifting it from people. I'm thinking about, museums are mission-driven institutions. So I think there's an aspect of collaboration in a sense that we have all signed up for a particular mission, and we are collaborating in executing that.
Yeah, that, I mean, it's foundational.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's sort of what's driving the collaboration, I guess, in a very overall sense. There's my whole, that's the whole thinking of the whole, right?
Yeah, right. Right.
But what's interesting about what you just said, Erin? I mean, a lot of interesting, but museums are mission-driven institutions, right? In very courses, and we in the field we talk about our mission and what it is and how museum missions have evolved over the past decades, right? Away from the collect, preserve, interpret brand to something that is more fluid and public-facing, inclusive in the broadest sense, right? So our missions have changed, and we all have a particular role to play in helping advance that mission in our institutions and in the field. So we have a role. So we're, the collaboration and the bigger picture strategy is only as good as what we bring to the table individually, right? So it has to be both. And Stephanie Brown, I know that we have a couple of questions, but I just wanted to squeeze in one more point. And this is kind of a big head scratcher for some of you. It turns out this list of skills and competencies that I've been cobbling together from various sources, another one of the top ones is creativity. Seems simple enough, right? Creativity. I have a theater background, a design background. I paint. Danielle, I know you have a fashion background. So, we might think of ourselves as creative people, because a lot of people out in the world think of paintbrush kind of variety of creative, right? Sort of that artistic slant. And yet what I'm finding is that creativity is in all of us in just different ways, whether it's creative problem solving or the kind of research and knowing how to find information and doing something with it, and maybe interpreting it in wall text in your exhibition, for example. So what does creativity look like for you, Danielle?
For me, essentially, it looks like kind of ironically going back to collaboration, thinking of creative ways in which to engage both my colleagues and to engage the public. So sometimes now for me, I'm in training to be able to be a docent for some of our tours. So in that sense, I still get to be creative in the way in which I lead the tours. So each person who's trained to do it is going to add their own spin to it. So that still, again, allows me a creative space. So it's not necessarily going to look like what people think of creativity in a traditional sense. I mean, that's still going to be there and still going to be a component of it. But there are other ways within the museum field that you can use creative components and creative skills to essentially to support the mission of the museum.
Agreed. What do you think, Stephanie?
So interesting, you said creativity. It was also on my values list, which I'm super excited to hear you say, because that makes me feel like sometimes I know what I'm thinking and doing. So thank you for that reassurance. So in sort of where I am right now, I feel like, you know, I don't get as much time maybe to be creative in the curatorial role as I'd like, to be able to physically take care of objects as much as I would like, because there are, like you were saying, as a lot of people do in small institutions, you wear a lot of hats. So sometimes the hat is, let me make sure the toilet doesn't overflow. And so it's part of that resiliency is being creative and resilient and being able to say, all right, what problems are we going to deal with today? But also with the relationships that you all work, everybody's been talking about the collaboration, and for me, again, taking from Erin, being able to try to learn how to speak each other's language is something I'm having to learn how to be really creative in, and to be able to express my background and where I'm coming from to people that don't necessarily understand it. And I say this a lot when I get frustrated about processes and things, and I say it's a process. It's an educational thing. It takes time. People, the people I interact with, they don't have a background in museum studies. They don't understand we have to have, UV filtering on the windows, or, fill in the blank. So it's a process. It takes time. I have to learn how to be more patient. That's also part of trying to be more creative, is finding ways to be more patient as well, and educating people creatively so they understand where I'm coming from, and we can all kind of, again, speak the same language.
Well said, Stephanie. That's really nice. I love that. And I'm glad it's on your list of values. That's great. What do you think, Erin? You're working at the mothership of a creative industry, right?
Yes. Definitely a range, I would say. Lots of troubleshooting, like Stephanie, problem solving. And then I think on the kind of strategy side, there's helping leadership to articulate and cast what this big vision is for, where we want to be in 5-10 years. We're writing our inaugural strategic plan right now, so there's a lot of those conversations happening, which is fun, for my creative and, I would say, kind of futuristic brain. But you also have to, on a very real scale, the day-to-day, just these departments need support in this way, or staff need support in this way. And so it's definitely a range.
Thank you, Erin. So Stephanie, Stephanie Brown, do you want to
Yes,
turn
yes.
you some comments or questions?
Let's talk to some, let's have some questions. Peter, I'll go ahead, and I've got the questions up here, so I'll go ahead and start pitching them. Trevor has a couple questions, actually. And he is interested in hearing about what elements, for Erin Golightly, what elements of seeing the whole thing are you most mindful of when you think of organizational strategy? And I think actually that ties with Trevor's other question, which is around what kind of leadership issues within the museum world that you regularly face. I feel like seeing the big picture and thinking about leadership in a museum are inextricably linked. And I know one of the things that we've talked about sometimes in this program is how we want to train people to lead from wherever they are in the museum. It's not just the person at the top of the pie chart, to mix a metaphor, who's the leader. Everybody has their own way of leading. So how do you all?
Stephanie,
Yes.
can you repeat the first part of the
Yes,
question?
yes. Speaking in terms of seeing the whole thing, what elements are you most mindful of when you think of organizational strategy? So what elements of the whole thing, I think. And I think anybody can hop in on that too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think how we all get there, right? But what are the individual goals along the way, I think, are the most important thing to be mindful of. It's not so much the big picture that you always want to keep in mind. I mean, you have it in mind, you have it set there, but I think there's major milestones, right, along the way that are working you towards that big strategy, but you're kind of behaving as if you're already there, right? I think it's part of that also. So and identifying, kind of the 5 to 10 months, 6 to 12 months, what do we look like along the way?
Does anybody else want to chime in around that?
Yeah, I agree with Erin. And then also, as she mentioned, the big picture is usually the mission. That's kind of what we're aspiring to, but you have to have those building blocks in between. So in order to see, it's almost like a mural. To see the whole thing, you have to put all these little pieces in so that it forms a picture. So essentially, that's what each of us bring to the table. We're part of the mural, and then there are going to be people who come and go. So sometimes some of that institutional knowledge is lost as people exit. And then there are going to be new people that come in that are continuing to help to build out this mural, which with the ultimate goal of accomplishing the mission of the museum.
I love that. I love that mural.
That was awesome. And let me just add to that. I think that making sure that everyone, department, staff members, they see themselves in that strategy, that mission. I think that is also really important to be mindful of, which touches to the kind of shared language, aspect. Because if there is a team that feels like they're not a part of that, or does not know what that mission or strategy translates to for their work or how it impacts their work, then you're not able to, achieve success, however you define that. So I think most mindful of things like that, like a shared understanding.
Mindful of our time, I'm going to move on to another question. Crystal says a lot of things that you all mentioned were about who you were and where you find your strengths. Do you have any advice for leaving your past job skills behind you and creating a new outlook for a new job? Greg, this is the kind of thing that you think about a lot. How would you rephrase that question? How would you think through that question?
So
it's a great question, Crystal. No shame to your question. It's a great question and a big one.
No, it's a really big question, and I encounter it on a daily basis with students, with coaching clients, colleagues, and here's why it's such a big deal. Many people come to the museum field from a variety of backgrounds, educational backgrounds, maybe history or anthropology or art history or such, but also lived experiences. And sometimes folks come from other fields altogether. Just having a conversation with a colleague who is a technical drafter for a city agency, not anything to do with museums, and having a conversation with him about, okay, what is it you put into place? What do you bring to the table as a technical drafter for a city agency? This just as an example. So thinking very specifically, what are your strengths, right? What are the things that you do to do your job if you're coming from another field? What do you care most about? Really, what are you passionate about? Because if you're not passionate about it, then you shouldn't be doing it, right? That doesn't mean to say that sometimes we aren't stuck in jobs that we're not particularly crazy about, but nonetheless. The other reason why your question is a really important one is there's a lot of people leaving the field. To be quite honest, leaving the field for a variety of reasons. Some of the big ones that we know of, right? Whether it's low pay or lack of pay equity or the lack of diversity and inclusivity in our institutions, toxic work environment, you know, the list goes on. And so folks are wanting to leave the field, right? Even folks who've been in there here for a few years trying to think, what else can I do? The same thing applies, right? You know, if you can see the big picture and strategy and pay attention to detail and collaborate and communicate and manage projects and do it creatively in the way you think about your work, you have a better option of finding some other place to work. And I know this is recorded, so I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've said for years, I love museums, but I'm not in love with museums. And what I mean by that is I really love what museums are. I love working in the museum field. I love the people. I love the storytelling, the objects. I love all the things about museums. But I can take some of that and go elsewhere and still love museums, right? I can still be a part of the museum field, even though I may not be doing museum work specifically. So I don't mean that in any way to disparage folks who work in museums at all, but just to say, you know, sometimes we can get blinded to this thing. I just want to be a collections manager, or I just want to be a museum educator. And somewhere along your career path, you may be faced with, what else can I do with this? I came to the museum field from theater design and elementary school arts education. And now I'm working in a different kind of capacity, museum adjacent. One other thing, Stephanie Brown, you said just a moment ago, and I'll circle back to you, but you were talking about leadership. I think one of the questions was about leadership issues. Here's another big thing that is happening in the field, long overdue, a focus to a more human-centered museum workplace. It's taken a long time, and it's taken a lot of pressure, people rising up, unionization, forcing salaries to be posted on job postings, paid internships. These are all just physical manifestations of the dysfunction that has plagued our field for a very, very, very long time. And we are now starting to see museum leaders shift that narrative around, not just taking care of our buildings and our objects and our collections and being more inclusive with our communities, all important. But as Micah Parson, who is the director, the CEO of the Museum of Us in San Diego, just said a couple of weeks ago in a program, we have been woefully negligent in taking care of our primary resource, which is our people. So I think we're at the beginning stages of seeing that shift, which I'm hopeful for. I'm optimistic about, because I think it's long overdue and so important for the sustainability of the field. All right, I'll stop talking.
No, but Greg, that's great. And that's really, I think that's something that's forefront of many of the ways that we're thinking about what we're doing right now. Incidentally, the Oakland Museum of California, which I know a lot of people read about in coursework, Oakland Museum just announced that they are unionizing. The staff is unionizing. So that's gonna be another story. I think that Erin has to leave us now. So thank you so much. It's always a treat to see you. Thank you for being here and contributing. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Super
yeah.
excited to chat with you all.
It's a great. Thanks.
Thanks,
Take care,
Erin.
Erin. We have one more. Well, we have a few more questions, but I think this last question might fill us up. What advice do you have for those of us who cannot afford to volunteer for years in order to gain the 3 to 5 years experience required for entry-level positions in museums. There seem to be very few internships out there that pay enough to cover living expenses and student loans. And
Yeah.
you know, lucky for us, the panel here today has an answer for that question. And we can answer that question once and for all and move on. I wish that were true. I wish that were true. That is not true. We have no answer for that question, but we can talk about it. And I think Danielle has some
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I decided to start transitioning into this field, the ability to find what I consider functional wages to support an adult were very few and far between. So when I did my required internship, at the same time, I was working like a regular job. So the reality is, to me, what it was is finding an internship that understood everything else that was going on in my life and was able to support that. And the people I worked with were able to do that when I worked at the DAR because I still had to work. So I completely understand. And I think that's a valid question because a lot of people, when you make a career change, you're not necessarily like fresh out of coming off of your bachelor's degree or undergrad. So sometimes you're like well into your life and you have things that you need, that things and people that are relying on you. So I would say if you can find an internship and if they're willing to work with you and understanding that you have to have another job to sustain yourself, then that will be my personal recommendation because I even read articles as I was transitioning about how many people were like, oh, it's just unrealistic for me to try to be in this field because like the internships don't pay. And I think in this day and age, that is just unrealistic to expect people to work for free.
Stephanie, I remember when you were in grad school, in your second grad school, one of the things that you were really, one of the puzzles you were trying to solve was how to make things work financially.
So are you talking PhD?
Mhm.
So I did my PhD overseas, which has its own additional limitations, including I was only allowed to work 20 hours per week as an international student. So because of that, it did work the 20 hours. It did happen to be in museum archival related kind of fields. But in addition to doing that and doing a PhD, I also tried to volunteer. And I know it's not always feasible for people to do. And I'm just going to be very frank. I have so many student loans now, unfortunately. And a lot of us are facing that situation. But at the time, it's what I had to do to get by. It's what I had to do to be able to get the education I thought I wanted and needed to be able to make myself, more relevant in the field. And I volunteered. I tried to be diverse in what I volunteered at because I never knew it was all collections based because that's my love. But I tried to be diverse in.
Okay, so I think I think Stephanie's connection is breaking up a little bit from the Pacific Northwest. Greg, what do you think I think about this all the time. I'm sure you think about this all the time. Where do you get with it?
You know what, as you pointed out, I wish we had answers and I wish that, this wouldn't be a challenge. I do think that it's the museum field is changing slightly.
Yeah.
Slowly, overdue, as I mentioned before, to be a little more human focused.
Yes.
And that includes things like paid internships, like living wage paid internships, or quite simply paying folks a reasonable wage working in museums.
Yeah.
And that it will always be a challenge to try to get the experience that you need in some other way while you're working somewhere else that is not museum related, for example.
Yeah.
Stephanie Carter, you're back. I know you were kind of in mid-sentence there.
Technology, right? But yeah, I actually was gonna say, much to what you were saying, that I do start to see some of these beginning stages of making it where we're talking about what's important to take care of us as people, being able, we want to have all these degrees, but we also have to be able to survive. You have to be able to pay rent and things like that. So I think it's important as an industry, like you were saying, Greg, to a shift that's starting to change, where we're focusing on taking care of these people who are taking care of the objects and the history and the education. We have to take care of us as well. And it may kind of not really answer the question of how you do it when you can't, but sometimes it's, right now you kind of find a way, unfortunately. As frustrating as that is, if it's work additional jobs or volunteer on your days off or things like that, and hopefully this shift starts happening, where we're able to seeing people not having to have 2-3 jobs to work in this industry, or to have to volunteer, but also transferable skills, like Greg says. You already have amazing skills, and why can't we utilize these more, where it's not just, oh, you have to have this very specific, and we need to think more broadly and holistically about the amount of transferable skills that people can bring into the industry as well.
Yeah, and you know what, Stephanie Carter, you just mentioned something that made me think of a conversation I was having last week with a former student. Similar to what this conversation is, how do I communicate what I know how to do, even though I haven't really had a full museum job yet, right? But I have this master's degree, right? And so I should be able to find a job, but I don't have the experience. And so how do I do that? And here's a little tip that I started employing. I was telling this former student, think about your graduate experience, your graduate school experience. Make a list of all the courses that you took in your program, Johns Hopkins or otherwise. Think about every assignment that you accomplished, every written assignment, every group project, every interpretive plan, every collections management policy you had to create, whatever it might be, and translate those assignments into what I call pre-professional experience. So imagine on your resume that you might have your work experience, whatever it might be, but right there is your graduate work experience. And it's remarkable because what it does is it shifts your mindset away from, I just, took out this fat student loan to get my graduate degree, and now I have nothing to show for it. But guess what? You do. All of those projects I know Johns Hopkins, of course, and the programs I've taught in, they're there to help you build your knowledge and your skills to think about a museum career, a museum profession, whatever it may be. So just do that. Sit down and hunker down, like, okay, what was that course? Oh, collections management, whatever. One of our assignments was we had to create a collections management policy, and it was a group project. So there you're communicating that you understand collections management policy and procedures. You understand what it takes to collaborate on a project. Right? So all of a sudden it starts appearing.
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
That's my advice.
Yeah. So, and it's about changing your perspective a little bit.
Yes.
Well, as you can hear, perhaps it is time for my dogs to have their dinner. They are barking, which perhaps you cannot hear, but now you know. We're at an hour. What a fabulous conversation. What a fabulous conversation. We did not get to cover all of the questions, but I think the questions that we did cover, we had some great insights into. I so appreciate you all taking the time to work with me to put this together, to make the time to be with all of us today. And we'll do our last curated conversation of this academic year in April. We'll start advertising that in about 2 or 3 weeks. So stay tuned. We hope we see you again. And thanks so much for joining us tonight. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.